Hey guys, that's Sleepy Girl here, and welcome to episode 3 of Sleepy's Franchise Zoo. Today we're going to be working on a red panda habitat. Now I've had a couple days without my PC, and so getting back into Planet Zoo, I wanted to do something simple and easy, and so that's why I decided to start back up with the Franchise Zoo. That being said, I had quite a few audio problems, and the original audio ended up being corrupt, and so that's why we're doing a voiceover with this, as usually due to the fact that it's a playthrough, we just record audio as we're playing. So things might be a little off from the placement and movement of the mouse and stuff and what I'm saying, but in general I think we'll get through it just fine. So now we're loading into our franchise, which is still unnamed at the moment. We've just kind of got Sleepy Hollow as a placeholder, and we're greeted by this wonderful message letting us know that we didn't make the Rhino challenge. Now, though I won't be getting any animals from this challenge, as a community we didn't complete it, we did get the outfit, and I'm pretty happy about that because the Rhino hat has to be my favorite hat so far. I really like it. So, last episode, in episode number 2, we did the Baird's tapir habitat as well as laying out the grid for this zoo. If you haven't seen the other episodes, basically, to sum it up, we are doing a square grid. As of right now, all the squares are going to be the same size. I'm not sure if that's going to change in the future, but that's kind of what we're going with right now, and we're going to be working on having all circular or rounded habitats within those squares on the grid. So there'll be no hard edges or straight lines in the habitat shape itself. Everything will be round and much more organic. I do like the idea of this. I think that the combination of the organic shapes within the squares as well as the grid itself, I think it'll make a nice combination. So the first thing I wanted to do was figure out what animal we were going to use. I was thinking of aardvarks again, but I wanted to take a look through the Zoopedia so that we could see if there was anything else that would fit and that was a little more entertaining. So when I was filtering through, I realized that the red panda is a much smaller animal than I had anticipated. I haven't used it as of yet. And so I do like the idea of using animals that I haven't used just yet. So the first shape that we did was kind of like a kidney bean type shape. And for this red panda habitat, we're going to go with a like a perfect circle, which is always fun. If you have any issues with making circles or are looking at filling in a circle for a plaza, you can take a look at our circular plaza tutorial. So basically I go through the steps of how I like to create circles, and it's a very simple way of doing it and ensures that you do get a perfect circle. And then from that point forward, it'll go into how to fill it, and then we have a bit of our episode in Shanti Wildlife Park. So I will have the link to that tutorial down below. So basically what I was explaining here in the original is that thanks to somebody on Discord, I figured out how to do the curved barriers. So I was struggling with that last time. I couldn't get the curve to be the proper angle, or it just wouldn't curve in the right direction. And so I put out help needed on Discord, and somebody thankfully responded with how to do that. So I'll show you guys that in just a moment. But first, we need to work on the circle. And what I was thinking is that if I place down a circular path, then I can go ahead and have my barrier just, hug the edge of the path, and it would be a lot easier to get that nice circular barrier in that way. Now I did struggle with the path here a little bit, mainly because I was restricted on size, and so I had to make it specifically fit within this square, whereas normally I just kind of make it as big as I want to. I'm not limited to being within a specific line. So as usual, the first thing to do is get those first 2 pieces down. It seems to be the perfect way to get a circle started to ensure that it's, ends up being perfect in the end. And I find anything bigger, just you end up with kind of like a flat side, and I really wanted to avoid that. So as you can see, I was struggling a little bit in the beginning. I don't know why it took me so long to come back around. I don't know if it's because I didn't play Planet Zoo for a couple days, or if it's just been so long since I've created a circle. But I really had a rough go at getting this started. So I was trying to initially center it off this the path at the bottom of the screen, and I really felt like that was important at first, but then with putting it right in the center, then I couldn't get 2 pieces of path side by side properly, because then the path was in the way, and I'd have to have 3. And like I said, if you do 3, then you end up with a flat side on your circle. And so it took me a little bit to get to grips. But something else that I wanted to mention here, as we watch me have numerous failed attempts at circles, is that for this zoo, I do want to make sure that people understand that right now we are working strictly on placeholders for habitats. So what I'm trying to do right now is kind of like the planning stage of the zoo. So we want to get habitats done and animals in, so that we can ensure that the size of the habitat is good, and then we can just kind of get the general layout of the zoo of where animals are going. Once our money gets up to about 5 million, I'd say, maybe 4 or 5 million, depending on how many habitats we've done by then I want to go back through the habitats and start detailing them. I'd like to remove the concrete barriers that I've put up as of yet, and replace those with natural type barriers. So we'll be using a lot of rocks, custom made fencing, things like that, just to give it a little bit more appeal and less jail-like, I guess you could say. Now another thing is, I mentioned this before, but unlike all the other zoos that we've been working on, instead of separating animals by continent or biome or anything like that, I'd really like to have a mixture of them. So kind of, we come in to the zoo, we decide what animal we're going to work on that day, and we do it. We're not going to pay attention to the biomes or anything, or the continents, as I mentioned. And then each habitat will be heavily themed to that specific animal. So if the animal is a desert animal, then we'll have desert theming. If they're a jungle animal, then we'll have jungle rainforest theming, whatever the case may be. But we're definitely going to be matching the animals and the theming of each habitat individually. So with that being said, we're going to have to work really hard with the spacing around the habitat that's within the square grid, to ensure that the zoo itself looks cohesive and has some zoo theming on the outside of the habitats, to really tie everything together, since all the habitats themselves are going to be completely different. So the circle that I just made was the right size, but it fit. However, I found that it was too close to the one side, so I don't want it in the center of the square per se. However, I would like it centered in general, so in one direction, I should say. So now that we have the right size done and we've figured out the angle snap that we're going to be using, we go ahead and shift it over a little bit, and that takes care of our circle. Now I will be explaining some ideas I have for how we're going to theme and decorate the outside of the habitats in a few moments. But I just want to go ahead and explain what we ended up doing for the curved barriers. So here I was trying it for the first time. I didn't test it beforehand. I kind of trusted the person who told me how to do it, and it ended up working great. So basically what she said was, instead of placing the first pillar and going from there, you want to place one as a starter, and then separate from it and place your second pillar. And then as you connect to the first one, you want to press Z, which will pull up the like a green circle. And with the Z still pressed down, you can then use your mouse to move around and select the actual curve that you want. And you can go both sides. It's not limited to one side. You don't have to worry about, which direction you're placing your pillars. And so I found that this was actually fairly easy once I knew that Z was the hotkey for curved barriers, I should say. And so it was a really great tool to have, and I much prefer the look of this barrier than the Baird's Tapir barrier with the, how we put a lot of small barriers to try and get a more smooth look. So I'm not going to go back and replace the barriers that we already did in Baird's Tapir, for the sole fact that we already planned to go back and remove them completely. And so we're just going to leave it for now. But from here on out, we're definitely going to be using the curved barriers when we're creating our habitats to give it a slightly nicer look, at least until we go back through and get that detailing done and finish off the habitats properly. So as you can see, this is going very well. I've got a bit of an issue when I first try and line it up with the pillar. It tends to want to clip over, but I believe that's just based on the fact that like on the length that I chose for the barrier itself. So I think if I had a shorter length picked, it would have made it easier and it wouldn't have been trying to clip further than the pillar I wanted it to. However, that being said, if it was shorter, it might not have reached that, and I was trying to avoid that. So I think it was, a very minor detail that really didn't bother me. And so for the sake of risking placing a pillar too far and it not reaching, it was something I was willing to deal with. So here we have the circle. I mean, technically it's probably not a perfect circle, but to me that looks like a circle, and the ease of doing that and how much better it looks than placing a million barriers down that are super small, I'm happy with it. And so as you can see, there is a lot of room outside of the habitat itself. And we definitely are going to be decorating that. And I'm quite excited for those projects. So for now, again, we're not going to be decorating any of that. That'll be once we come back. And then every time we do a habitat, we will do the habitat itself and everything within that specific grid decorated. And I think that'll be a lot of fun because we're going to be working a lot with foliage, as well as creating custom decorations with all our building and construction pieces. And we're going to be creating a lot of like realistic type things. So things that you would see in a real zoo, if you were to go and visit a zoo, that may not be in game itself. So now that we have the barrier door added, and I was quite worried about the habitat gate itself, I realized afterwards that I thought that the barrier was too close to the path, that it wouldn't allow us to place the gate, but it didn't end up being a problem at all, which I was quite relieved. So now that the barrier is done, we can go ahead and get our red pandas. So I knew that I didn't have any in my trade center because I've never used them before, but I thought I'd check our gifted animals from all the challenges, but I didn't have any there either. So we're just gonna pull up the regular trade center and get started at looking for some pandas. Now I like to start off by setting the genetic qualities to gold, because if gold is available, obviously that's what I'd prefer, and it just saves us from scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and by the time you find something, you go to adopt it and it's no longer available. So the first one on the list had pretty great stats, and so instead of checking the other ones, I just decided to go ahead and get the first one, because again, I don't want to risk trying for a different one, not getting it, going back to the first one, and it no longer being there. Now, unfortunately, in the gold rank, there were no males, so now I switch it back to males only, and check silver, and unfortunately there's nothing, and check bronze, and again there's nothing. So our male is not going to have the best genetics. However, I'm hoping that the female's genetics are strong enough that we get some decent offspring from the two of them. So looking here, the first one is not bad, the second one is not good, and so on and so forth. They're just pretty horrible until the last one, but I decided the first one was a little bit better, so we'll go and select that one. Now, as recently brought to my attention that the quarantine actually has some good use to it, and that it is important to use a quarantine. So we're going to go ahead and place our red pandas in the quarantine building. To start. Now, unfortunately, I find the trade center a little slow when you're in your own trade center, especially when you've already put an animal in and you're going back for another one that's not on the first page. Because it kind of refreshes as that animal is taken out of your trade center and put in the zoo itself. And so I feel like that's a bit unfortunate, and it can be a little frustrating at times, especially if you're purchasing an animal that there's, like, you're not just getting a pair, you've got like quite a few of them to put in. I can get a little frustrated with that, but we've only got 2, so it's not too bad. Now, as you can see, we've got quite a bit of congestion going on, which is typical. We've only got 1 habitat and a very small viewing point. But I'm not 100% sure, as I was mentioning earlier about the theming of the overall zoo. I'm not 100% sure what I want to go with path-wise just yet. Last episode, I changed one of the paths to one of the darker wooden paths, and then for the viewing area side, use the tree log slice path. But again, I'm not sure how I feel about it as of yet. So I've decided to leave the paths alone for now. Just continue using the like grayish wood path. And we're going to use that for now. And once we get more of the zoo laid out and some of the decorations in, I think then I'll be able to see better what the overall look is going to be and kind of make a final decision on what we're going to do path-wise. The only thing I know as of yet for paths is that I do like the idea of having a specific path set for viewing areas and then a separate path type for the grid itself, and then obviously for the grids that are going to be used for staff facilities, we'll be using some staff paths to ensure that the guests don't end up in there and then end up with some negative impact because of it. Now, I did notice when I laid down one of the facility buildings that it had, as you can see here on the top left of that right box, it's got a scenery rating. Now, I can't remember if that's always been there. And so I'm hoping that if we can get them decorated up nice and get some buildings, actual proper buildings placed around them, that hopefully it will lower the negative impact radius at least a little bit, which should help us, especially with the type of zoo we're doing with this grid. So I end up attaching a piece of path to the circle as I realize that our animals are never going to get there without it. And then again, it'll also allow, we can just let the guests view it from that path all the way around to start off. So I fast forward things a little bit so that we can get our animals in here. And now getting him on fast forward was a little more difficult than I anticipated. And also I didn't realize how small red pandas were. And another thing that I noticed as soon as I put them in is their tails really remind me of a raccoon tail, that striped, really fluffy raccoon tail. And then looking at them in general, they are very similar to a raccoon. And so I thought it was funny that they're named after a panda. I don't know why that is, what the correlation is. But if you know, feel free to let me know in the comments. I always like learning new things. So I believe the first thing we're going to do is get a shelter for this guy. And so I decided to go with just a plain wooden shelter, which I realized afterwards was climbable and was probably not the best idea, especially where I placed it, but we'll get that fixed later on. So now that the shelter is taken care of, I realized that all these people are hoarding over here and they've got nothing to see. So we're going to go ahead and place some one-way glass, which, as you can see, with doing that, this just reinforces my decision of blowing up the zoo that I had, because all of the research is already done, except for the animals that I haven't had yet, of course. But the mechanics, that's the word I'm looking for. The mechanic research has been completed. And so to me, that just makes this reinforces the fact that this was a good decision. I can go ahead, put some one-way glass so I don't have to worry about the animals getting stressed. And so as I'm fixing the terrain here, I noticed that the shelter is climbable, that panda can probably escape. And so I paused the game right away because I don't want to deal with an escaped panda, especially with all the people surrounding the area. And so we're going to go ahead and start by raising that. And then I decide that it's probably best to actually move the shelter itself. There was a little piece of it that was clipping. I'm not sure what the current status of it is, but in the past we've had issues with animals escaping when there's climbable things that are touching a barrier, no matter what type of barrier, even though it's a cement barrier, and there's no way that an animal could just walk through it, especially a tiny little red panda. But I decided to move the habitat to ensure that there is no escaping, as you know, that's not something I want to be dealing with, especially in these planning stages. You know, we kind of want to go through this quickly, bang out as many habitats as we can while building money, so that we can come back and start decorating properly and really have a luxurious zoo sooner rather than later. So these red pandas require like very simple requirements, but they do like soil. So we go ahead and place quite a bit of soil in the habitat, and then we're gonna move over and I check the other welfare screens. So coverage, they're going to need some foliage. And then I'm thinking that if I put the plants down first, it's going to be a little bit more tricky to get the climbable features in. And so I thought that putting the climbing features in first would be best. Now, I know that I said last time that one of the main reasons that I had said for blowing up the zoo was that I got lazy in some of the primate habitats and put blueprinted climbing pieces in, and that they weren't custom. And I do still feel that way. However, in this stage, because we are just planning things out and putting placeholders, I just want to get the animals to have a decent welfare so that we can go on to the next one and the next one and the next one until we come back and really detail each habitat out itself. So for now, again, as a placeholder, we're using these blueprinted climbing structures. However, when we come back and detail these habitats, those will be removed and we will be building custom ones for sure. So we get some food and water in before too much more time passes, as that tends to be something that I forget about. And now we're going to move on to the foliage. So we're going to go ahead and select taiga and temperate, as well as Asia, so that we match the requirements of these animals. And that's when I noticed that bamboo is available for them, which makes me very happy, because bamboo has to be one of my favorite things, favorite plants in this game. Now, after just placing 3, they're happy foliage wise. It's at 100%. So again, for now, we're going to leave that. When we come back and decorate, we're going to be using some smaller foliage so that we can add quite a bit more and have it, you know, spread out around and make it look a lot more realistic. But in doing so, I noticed that we have some protesters. So when I was trying to figure out what was wrong, it didn't really make sense to me that their welfare was still so low. I figured that the game just hadn't, you know, refreshed a little bit or updated so that the protesters would go away. But then when clicking on the red panda again, I noticed that, you know, it really is in the red. And that's when I noticed that the temperature wasn't right. So I believe I go back into Zoopedia so that we can check the temperature requirements for the red panda. But first, we're just going to go ahead, before I forget, and put a vet on vet research for the red panda so that we can get some enrichment. That being said, I realized that because I have researched so many animals already, including pandas and some other climbable animals, I figured that we probably have some enrichment items for them already. So I realized that the foraging box is one of them, which I'm not a big fan, and I opted not to sink that one in with rocks like I did the one for the Baird's tapir. It took some time, and realistically it's not something that I'm going to be keeping. We're going to be doing something else with them. So I decided to just let it be as it is. We'll leave it like that for now. And let me know what you think, but I've been finding that the radius required for some of the enrichment items to be quite ridiculous. They just seem much, much larger. Like the radius that you require for them seems much larger than what's realistic, in my opinion. Then again, I don't run a zoo, so I don't really know. But it seems off. So here's when I noticed that the temperature is off. So like I mentioned, we're going to go into Zoopedia, check what their temperature requirements are, 0 to 29 degrees Celsius. So checking our current temperature, it's 42 degrees. I realize that we're going to need a cooler. So I'm going to go ahead and place that cooler down. Then I realized that it's probably best to get the first cooler to the right temperature, and then I can just duplicate that one. And that's when I realized that the nice red banner at the top of the screen, and why it's not showing me the radius circle of this cooler, is because there's no power. So that brings us to the struggle of what are we going to do? So again, with the shape that I'm doing this zoo and the style, I can't really put transformers in just because the negative impact radius, no matter where the guests would walk, there would be a negative impact basically. So we're going to use a solar panel, which we luckily already have unlocked. And with solar panels, there's no negative radius, which is perfect. Now, I do have some ideas for how we're going to proceed with this in the future. One of them includes a whole underground staff layer, basically, like underground walkways and stuff for the staff to have quicker access and not have to try and walk through crowds of people and stuff. But I'm not sure logistically how that's going to end up working out. So for now, we're just going to stick with solar panels because, like I mentioned, they have no negative impact. And I do want to make it clear that I don't plan on keeping just random solar panels all over the place. But, you know, it is what it is. And for now, we're just going to leave it. So I got a nice notification that our Baird's tapir is about to have offspring. And so we're just going to pop over here and take a look really quick and see that. Now, I do remember as a young child, I saw a baby tapir at a zoo in New York State, I believe. And ever since that moment, I have been absolutely mesmerized by these beautiful creatures. I could not wrap my very young mind around the fact that, you know, they're born with such a beautiful pattern. And I mean, not that they're not nice animals when they're grown up, but just like the change in the pattern, to me, that was mind-blowing as a young child. I just thought that was so cool, especially how intricate the pattern is. I just fell in love with them. I think they're absolutely adorable. Now that we have some more babies, or a baby, we're going to go back to our red panda and take a look and make sure that their welfare is good. So welfare seems to be in the green now and very good. And our customers are complaining that these zoo ticket prices are too low. So we go ahead and raise those slightly. We're going to, you know, accept this reward for God only knows what. I don't really pay attention to those anymore. And so as you can see, we've got a lot of guests, and because we put a 4-meter path, I mean, guests are getting stuck just because we've got like close to 2,000 guests right now and only 2 habitats, which again is something else that seems very unrealistic. However, we need guests to make money, and so we're going to leave it at that for now. But what I was explaining at this point was, with these extra bits of grass around the habitat that are within that grid, I'd like to do, I have a few ideas already actually, for what I'd like to do here. So one of them would be a close encounters area. So basically we'd put up, like in this bottom left corner, we'd make kind of like a triangular type shape, and put a custom fence up. It would just be something small, and there'd be an entrance that would be on the side of the habitat. And basically what it would be, we'd make some, you know, some small benches and just have an open area in the center. And this would be an area where a zookeeper could take one of the red pandas, if that's where it is, and bring it over into the close encounters area, and would be able to give, you know, an educational talk about red pandas and how their species is living in the wild, what we're doing to help grow their numbers, that kind of thing. Just some educational stuff. Again, typical stuff that you would see in a real zoo, as well as give some details on the red panda itself. So how long they live, and basically the information that we see in Zoopedia. That being said, I'd also like to put like an info booth or a gift shop or something beside it and have it themed accordingly, which would be like the ticket booth. And so you could buy a ticket for a close encounter for the red panda right there at the red panda habitat. You know, there'd be an ATM beside it to make it, you know, ensure that people have the money to pay for it. And then they could walk in the entrance of the the close encounters area, which is right beside it, walk in and enjoy a close encounter. So I'm thinking of making some custom benches, you know, some little signs that say at what times there's going to be a close encounter, that kind of thing. And I think that these are things that I can definitely reuse and repurpose in this zoo. You know, there's going to be quite a few habitats, I feel like, that we're going to be able to do that. Obviously, we're not going to do that with a lion or something. I mean, we could, because it's not really going to be used, but just some little things that I think make the park seem more realistic, and that personally are things that I would like to do if I go to a zoo. if I were to go to a zoo, I would be all about all those little extra packages. So the behind the scenes package, the seeing how zookeepers prep food, like all those things are things that I would enjoy to learn about as an adult. And I think it's also fun for kids to learn too, to kind of teach them when they're young, and kind of gain an interest in animals as well as the wild and what we can do to help animals and, you know, keep them alive and stop things from going extinct. So I realized that we should probably put some education up again for this animal. One, we want to keep our education rating up to keep guests happy so that we can keep earning money, because right now, aside from planning our zoo out, the main goal really is to earn some money so that we can come back in and decorate it the way I'd like to decorate it. So we're going to set those boards up to Red Panda. Then we're going to go ahead, and I realized that the last one isn't within the power source because solar panels have a much smaller radius than a transformer does, which comes with the whole, you know, no negative impact. However, you need quite a bit more of them to cover your zoo area. But that's okay. We place another one. Again, these are just temporary. We're going to be fixing that later on. And once that's powered, then I decide that we're going to need some educational speakers. So when I go in to get the educational speakers, I notice the donation bin and realize, you know what, I should probably get those put down before I forget. I have no idea why I was looking at the barrier again. Or what I was saying. However, you can see with my mouse movements as I'm speaking, or as you would have seen, I suppose. My mouse movements when I'm speaking, I believe, is because I'm a French Canadian and we are known to speak with our hands. And so, as I can't really speak with my hands when playing, I end up with a lot of mouse movement, swirling around the screen, making shapes, trying to depict what I'm saying in form of mouse movements, as in real life, if I'm speaking, my hands are going a million miles a minute. I honestly have no idea what I was talking about. Oh, I think here I was mentioning the fact that I'd like some of the grids, like every so often there's going to be a grid that's going to be that's going to be dedicated to staff facilities. So the staff room, I was mentioning the solar panel stuff. So a staff room, we're going to have maybe a transformer in there. We'll have water treatment plant, vet research, workshop, all that kind of stuff in those. I'd also like some to be dedicated to plazas. So all the stores, the drink shops, food shops, gift shops, info, all that stuff. And also something else that I was thinking of is for some of the larger animals, although we could get away with a pair in this size grid, I think I might connect two of the grids together, either by doing something underground, like have a sunken in habitat, or just remove the path between two grids so that we can get some larger habitats in there so that we can keep the organic shapes and have them large enough for the animals themselves. And I'm quite excited, again, like I mentioned, I'm quite excited about this. Once I saw the idea to have, that grid laid out with the organic shapes inside, it just made me think, like, it just hit me, like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to try. I'm really hoping that it's successful in looking nice at the end. But I think a lot of that is going to come down to when we come back and really, beautify these habitats. So take down the barriers, put up some natural barriers, and really give it like a much nicer aesthetic. And again, theme it. So I think we're going to do a few fun themes depending on animals, but that'll come in future videos. So now that all four, I think it's four of them, yeah. All four boards have speakers. We've got donation bins. You can see we've got over 2,000 people, which again is insane for a zoo that has 2 habitats. We're gonna unbox our animals and take a look around. Find this guy. Freak, they're cute. I can't get over it. Every time I look at it, I see a red raccoon. I should probably research why they're pandas and not raccoons. I would suppose it could be because of where they're from and the fact that they live in the wild like they do. Anyways, happiness is on point. Welfare is on point. That's the main concern. Taken care of. Take a look at this guy checking out his watering hole. Another thing too is I'd like to start creating facades for some of the more typical enrichment items and feeding items. So instead of having like a random plank there for food, or some of them have the metal trays, that kind of stuff, I like to sink them into something that's a little nicer looking. Same thing, I've seen a few facades done for the water pipe and it just looks incredible. So that's something I'd like to do. Maybe make a few different varieties of them that would cover the different biomes so that they would match the habitat itself. And then we can kind of rotate through them as we go through our zoo and create all the habitats. Same thing for enrichment items. The foraging box, we're going to create something for that. The waterfalls that we used a lot of in our rainforest build for the Calabricorn Zoo, those are going to be coming up in this zoo as well. And again, something that I just like to be able to create a facade for, make it much nicer and more appealing looking. So right as I was finished recording, I got a nice notification that our female red panda was going to have some offspring. So I decided to pause the game right away, go back into recording mode, and catch this on camera so that I didn't forget about it when we logged in the next time, and then I ended up missing it. So here we go. The wait begins, and here's our first baby. Oh, it is so cute. The only thing is I find there's not much difference in size. I mean, it's half the size, but it doesn't seem like there's that much different in size. And then a second one popped out, and I was not expecting that. I should have checked in Zoopedia, but I didn't. I don't really pay attention to the minor details, which again, I probably should. But these are the cutest little guys, and I'm so happy that we got 2 of them. That will definitely help, and it cracks me up when they stand up on their hind legs like that. It's so cute. They really have an interesting coloring as well. Like, their underneath, like their underside is really dark, almost black. Their tails are super duper light in comparison with the rings on it, and then the tip is black. Behind their ears are black, the front of their ears are white. They've got some white markings on their face, some lighter markings on their face, and then in the body, the front half, it's kind of like a tapir. The front half is, a darker, and then their behind is a little lighter. I love looking at animal markings, and I just think that they're absolutely adorable and really interesting. So thanks again for hanging out with me in our franchise zoo. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you for watching.